Good morning or good afternoon, depending on your time zone. I'm Larry Morse, co-founder and managing partner of Fairview Capital Partners, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to another in the series of conversations we're hosting with thought leaders, institutional investors, and experts in our investing universe who are in positions to offer authentic insights into topics that we think are timely and of significant interest to our shareholders and our broader networks. Today, I'm pleased to have as our guest the Honorable Shawn Wooden, who was elected Treasurer of the state of Connecticut in November of 2018, at which time he became the 83rd Treasurer in the history of a state that dates its statehood to January 9th, 1788. That's pretty heady stuff. Treasurer Wooden, welcome, and thank you for taking time to be with us today.
Thank you, Larry.
Perhaps we could begin by my focusing briefly on your career prior to assuming this office, which includes over 2 decades as an investment attorney with one of the most reputable law firms in Connecticut. Indeed, in your final years at the firm, you managed its public pension fund investment practice. This is also not your first public office. Not too many years ago, you found time to serve 4 years as president of the Hartford, Connecticut City Council. And much earlier in your legal career, you worked in the AFL-CIO's Office of Investment in Washington, D.C. So the public pension fund institutional investor arena is clearly one you knew well before entering your current position. So what motivated you to seek the office of State Treasurer, and what parts of your personal history prior to becoming Treasurer prepared you most for this role?
Well, thanks, Larry, and thanks for inviting me to participate in this. I know you have an august lineup of folks, so I feel honored to join you. And what I think the real question is what motivated me towards public service.
Okay.
And it's really based on kind of growing up and great parents always engaged in the community and giving back. And so that's kind of an ethos in which I grew up with, and kind of went through school, became a campus activist in college. And so kind of carried that part of me in terms of being essentially trying to always make an impact in whatever environment in which I found myself, and trying to make things better for people. And so that led me to eventually become president of the city council in Hartford while I was practicing law as an investment attorney. And so as it relates to treasurer, when people would ask me the question of, typically they would say, why would you want to be treasurer of Connecticut at a time like this? And so they thought it was bad then when I was running. Now, we really have some challenges. But with that said, I said, if you know my background, right, AFL-CIO Office of Investment, 21 years in the law firm, investment lawyer, working with government, state of Connecticut, pension funds, that was one of my clients, and I had pension funds all over the country. It became a natural next step in my public service career when the prior treasurer decided that she would not seek re-election. And I got to tell you, I think I'm lucky, despite everything. And some days I want to pull my hair out. I'm lucky to be able to do public service and to combine that with decades of experience that I've honed as a professional, and to be able to bring all of that to bear. And so I feel fortunate to be able to meld my worlds in terms of kind of my personal family ethos of community service with my professional career as an investment lawyer, and now being able to serve as treasurer of the state of Connecticut, overseeing our pension funds, our bond issuances, and a host of other things. So that's what brought me to this moment, and I feel blessed to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you for that response. And you touch on some of the things that fall on your watch at this time on your plate. I want to focus one particular dimension of your portfolio of responsibilities. You serve as a sole fiduciary of Connecticut's retirement plans and trust funds. Would you mind giving our audience a sense of what those responsibilities entail and what your key objectives are in that area in particular?
Sure. And just one slight modification. I am the sole trustee, and we have a host of fiduciaries, including folks like Fairview Capital, who manage our assets.
Corrected.
But I am the sole trustee, which there are three of us, I believe the number in the country in terms of this structure and this role, where typically there are pension boards and with several trustees. And so the difference in Connecticut is I'm the sole trustee for our pension systems, which means I make the decisions with how to deploy those assets when we invest in a host of other things. Now, in that process, and why it's important, I talk about a number of fiduciaries. We, of course, have investment consultants. We have managers that I select. We have, I have a chief investment officer along with an entire investment team heading up different asset classes. So there's a lot around this, but at the end of the day, with the role as the sole trustee, I make the decisions with respect to how the funds are managed.
Understood. So without getting into too much inside baseball, how have Connecticut's retirement plans and trust funds fared, in the current market volatility? Have you found it necessary to take any particular actions this year as a result of the market volatility caused by the pandemic?
We have fared, and I say this in the context of all pension plans. Obviously, this is a tougher financial environment for us, but we have fared well. And they say sometimes it's better to be lucky than smart. I am proud to say that I believe my investment team was smart and also lucky in some regards, which I'll share with you. Mm-hmm. So when I came into office, I've been very focused since day one on maximizing our returns, of course, but also managing and mitigating our risk. And so even though we were in the midst of a bull market, we focused right away on reducing our exposures to global equities in the midst of that, because I and my team knew that wasn't going to last forever. And we started repositioning, bringing global equities down and increasing fixed income, adding infrastructure, and doing a number of things basically to build an all-weather portfolio that and assumed a market downturn. Certainly did not anticipate a downturn coming that soon or as severe as it hit us, but it did position our portfolio very differently. I also, in 2019, hired the state's first chief risk officer for our pension plans. And again, with a mindset on managing risk. And my premise, which I talked about occasionally on some panels, was that those investors that would be the best at managing, first understanding risk in the marketplace and managing for that, we're going to be the investors that would outperform over the long term. And so for all of those reasons, we revised our asset allocation in the spring of 2019 and made an additional revision to that we started in the fall that concluded in February of 2020. And just by way of example, one of the big changes in February was creating a private credit allocation. And that was something that we did sporadically, opportunistically, but this was the first time we created it, and with a 5% allocation bucket for that. And so and this is where I talk about the lucky part, mm-hmm. right? In addition to kind of thinking strategically, at the same point as the market is cratering because of a global pandemic, we have a new allocation to private credit And this is one of the best times to get into that space, just given the significant dislocation in the market.
Agreed.
So overall, our strategic plan, pacing, other things have remained the same through this pandemic. What we are doing differently, some of it's operationally and some of it's tactical decisions. So the nature, sticking with private credit, the nature of that private credit in where we are in the market will be different, more distressed as compared to more senior debt in the structure. And that will evolve over time. So we're making some different tactical decisions, but the broad strategy and game plan is the same.
Understood. So keeping with this for a moment, in this vein, has the present environment caused you to either alter or pause any particular investment initiatives that were either in the works prior to the onset of the pandemic, or things you had been considering as you came into office, and with these recent developments, you've decided to temporarily put on hold?
No, we have moved ahead with anything that was certainly being diligenced or had been diligenced sufficiently to reach my level from the team. We have moved ahead with respect to how we're thinking about some of the managers that we take on. One of the things, there is always a focus on track record, on whether or not you have experience. Again, we were assuming and building into our strategy a market downturn. So looking at managers who've experienced that before was important prior to the pandemic. Within the pandemic, and now it is bedrock, essential to understanding track record in the context of whether or not you've been through a severe market dislocation downturn.
Sure. So I want to shift gears for a moment. Among the things that the pandemic has exposed in our society is the degree to which disparities in wealth between white, Black, and brown communities in the country figure prominently in the overall health and well-being of these respective communities and their relative vulnerabilities to the ravages of COVID-19. And when you compound this recognition with the George Floyd protests, re-energized Black Lives Matter movement, there's at the moment a heightened focus on the role that disparities in access to capital play in creating and sustaining these disparities in wealth for white, Black, brown communities in the country. You've been quite outspoken on these issues, and indeed, your office, the Office of the Treasurer of the State of Connecticut, has long been a leader in promoting diversity and inclusion in the investment management industry. I would note for our audience that your office pioneered in developing and publishing a set of leading-edge diversity principles that were adopted by the state's Investment Advisory Council going back as far as April of 2006. So do these principles continue in force? Have you been able to leverage your role as treasurer to continue and to augment efforts on this front?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you note the history of the office, because I certainly do feel like I'm stepping into a legacy of commitment to diversity and inclusion within this space. And with respect to the diversity principles, yes, that is still a core tenet of our policy. In fact, it's embedded within our investment policy statement as reaffirmed as recently as 2019. And so that's still critical. But beyond that, I would say what's really critical is operationalizing, right? So principles are the first step and foundational, but operationalizing those principles into how you interact with the asset management community and how we make decisions in terms of deploying capital. Yeah. And that's been a big focus of mine since I've been in office. We still have our diverse brokerage program. In fact, we've enhanced it and expanded the types of brokers that it applies to. We We have the Connecticut Horizon Fund program and Emerging Managers program. We are reviewing that actively as we speak. It's been a successful program, and when it was launched, certainly cutting edge, but I want a new and improved version that's even more robust in terms of how we engage and how we provide access and opportunity to diverse managers. And so there's a lot that we're doing in this space, and I see it on a personal level, and because I've known many former treasurers, I feel it's incumbent upon me to build on that work that was started, but to bring it to an even higher level and a greater impact, and that's what they would want from me.
Understood. As you look around the country more generally, and thinking in terms of your conferers, if you will, those who occupy similar positions, do you think that public pension funds can or should play a more robust role in moving our country forward in the areas of diversity and inclusion with respect to investment management?
Yes, I think we absolutely can, right? I say that unequivocally. We absolutely should, because we represent such a large amount of capital in the asset management industry, and for public pension funds in particular, our beneficiaries are very diverse, right? And there are lots of reasons. Thirdly, which as a fiduciary, perhaps most importantly, is that there is substantial data that supports the notion that diversity enhances value. We have done very well, or I should say our diverse managers have done very well by us and my beneficiaries. And so from that lens, we should absolutely be leading the charge on making sure diversity and opportunities are expanded within our space. We are well positioned to do so, and we should.
So allow me to get just a bit micro in this particular area, precisely because your office has been very forward-leaning, ahead of the curve in many respects on these matters. Are there lessons that have been learned in the stewardship of Connecticut's pension funds, trust funds, that can and ought be usefully shared with other institutional investors on a national level?
Yes, I believe just a massive amount of education is required, for public pension plan trustees, for treasurers, because once, fundamentally this comes down to the numbers and producing returns over a long period of time. And the numbers bear out the fact that you will do better if you pay attention to promote and engage diverse managers. And so I would share the macro data from some of the thought leaders in this space, and Fairview certainly, you've written on the opportunity sets that exist and how it's expanded and kind of different correlations. And I would share what thought leaders are saying around this to support it. And I would also share the state of Connecticut story and that personal validation of making these types of investments, the returns, right? I'll say within our top quartile performers, there are a plethora of diverse management teams in our top quartile. And so to my colleagues across the country, to pension fund trustees across the country, I would say, look at the numbers, understand that, and put diversity within that context as a fiduciary. And I think once you do that, it is pretty hard to uphold your fiduciary duties and not engage more diversity in your manager selection.
Great. So I think our audience would be particularly interested in hearing about your private equity strategy. Can you share your approach to this particular area? Any new initiatives that you might currently be considering or that are underway within your investment program?
I would say, I wouldn't call it a new initiative, but so we're at a 7% actual allocation now with a 10% target. I intend to, in a disciplined, consistent, steady way, keep deploying capital to the space to get us to that 10% target. I would, over a decade ago or more, probably 15 years ago, the state had inconsistent pacing, which, there are issues with that. So as part of what we are focused on, and my chief investment officer is making sure we stay disciplined to deploying capital in that private equity space. Within that, again, looking at managers who, particularly right now, who've gone through market cycles, who have that experience. We have some managers who, simply, they've made more money for their investors in down markets in the private equity space. And, that's powerful when you're considering how to allocate. Additionally, I would say with respect to, I mentioned earlier that we are reviewing, revamping our emerging manager strategy. One of the things that I plan to do is to seek to deploy a greater amount of capital in the private capital asset classes, including private equity, to diverse managers.
Interesting. So in that regard, I mean, this slowdown, this downturn caused by the COVID pandemic is likely to affect diverse managers disproportionately, particularly when it comes to raising capital, given they generally represent newer firms, have fewer institutional investors. When you think about that group of managers, do you have any particular advice for them as they are out there today attempting to raise capital in an environment that, quite frankly, is challenging?
Yeah, and part of what I'm going to say is not going to be novel. So, disclaimer, warning: it's not novel. But one, stick to your knitting. Remain disciplined. Do not fall to the temptation to try to migrate your strategy to where allocators are deploying capital, because even if you have a smaller pool of capital that you stick to your knitting and you're disciplined about and you generate the returns, you will survive this period of time and you will live to fight another day with greater prosperity. But so it's really about not migrating, but staying to and being disciplined, because managers are rewarded for discipline in many ways. Discipline on investment strategy, discipline with how much capital you deploy in terms of the opportunity set. And so that would be my biggest advice. And so that's on the manager side. For my peers in the country, yes, my word of advice would be, in addition to everything I've already said about looking at the numbers and focusing on this group, because there is a disparity between how similarly situated investment firms, whether it's a star manager or team coming out of a premier shop, and how they're viewed at fund launches compared to others, right? There is a racial disparity that exists that is not explained simply by the resume or the experience. We need to be cognizant of that and pay attention. Now, there is also with newer managers, there's a structural challenge for large institutional investors like Connecticut and others, which is the amount of concentration that we can have in a fund. So I've had conversations with peers who do not use fund of funds. And I understand some of the arguments against it, double layer fees and so forth. I get it. But a few things. One, you have to look at all in terms of fees relative to performance.
It
And
really is
return.
net, right? Correct.
Net, right?
That's
Your
right.
real number.
That's your real
But
number.
two, if you don't, and I had this conversation recently with a fellow treasurer, if you don't utilize these structures, you are structurally barring an entire group of potential managers because diverse managers tend to oftentimes take longer to raise larger pools of capital. You have all of those issues, and just like the pandemic is displaying what we've known, many of us, for a long time, of significant health disparities.
Yep.
Just like the 8 minutes and 46 seconds of George Floyd's death has shown a lot of Americans what we've known for a long time, which is there is a disparity with how policing often engages with Black men, but Blacks generally.
Yes.
There is that disparity. So at this time, for managers, it's like people like me and others, we have to move the nation. We have to move our peer group to a more equitable viewpoint on the merits, and to be able to see that value. And Eddie Brown, recently wrote a very powerful opinion piece, which underscored that difference that I'm talking about with, in his case, a Black manager coming
Yes.
out of a top firm, and how that's treated differently. And so, but with all of that going on, it would be, I believe, a grave mistake for managers to not stay disciplined to their strategy and what they do best, even if it means they raise less capital right now and deploy less.
Excellent counsel. Mr. Treasurer, you've been very generous with your time. By way of a close, at some point down the road a ways, you'll look back on your experience as state treasurer of one of the most successful public pension funds in the country. By what measures are you personally likely to then judge your own success in this role?
I will judge my success on a number of metrics. One is what I believe everybody else will judge me on is, how did the pension fund perform? Did I maximize long-term performance on a risk-adjusted basis? And that is a metric and a standard as a fiduciary that I apply to myself and I expect to be judged by. I will also be judged by, I believe, this pandemic, this once in 100 years pandemic.
You didn't script it, but you have it. It's on your watch.
It's on my watch.
Right.
And how prepared were we? What did we do to navigate through it? And how did we come out on the other end? And, at least so far, and I will, with humility, say, the jury's, of course, still out. My investment team is doing a good job, both in terms of positioning and managing through. I will also, on a personal level, judge myself on how did I use this role while I sat in this chair, consistent with my duties as a fiduciary. How did I do it to move the needle and make the state of Connecticut better, to make our nation better, to make our industry better? And in this moment, where we're in the midst of the global pandemic, we're dealing with our racial epidemic that we've been living through for centuries. An important part of that is, did we make things better in terms of closing the opportunity gaps for people of color in our country? Did I do everything I could in my power to make a difference? And that is why I made the corporate call to action, in which, and I started writing it actually after the death of Ahmaud Arbery. I thought I was done on the day of the Amy Cooper and Christian Cooper incident in Central Park, and George Floyd's death. And calling on, I said, what can I do in the space in which I occupy that may be unique from many others who care about these issues? And I have leaned in, calling on corporate America, and in particular the financial services industry, to get off the sidelines, take a stand against racism, to look in the mirror, to make your organizations better, top to bottom. That's corporate boardrooms, C-suites, diversity, pipeline programs, promotion and opportunities within your firms, but also to look outside of your windows. And looking out there, how can you move the needle on some of these deep structural challenges that our nation faces? And beyond the PR statements, and all of the firms have them, and they're circulating with their employees and with the public. Beyond that, and after the protesting stops, what's the work that you're willing to do, CEO, to make these disparities smaller and to have our nation realize its true aspirations? And so next steps, I'm engaging CEOs, convening them around closing economic disparities in our society. And I'm actively in the midst of convening that. And I say we will have significant police reform done at the state and, knock on wood, federal level within the next 10 months. But the work that I'm talking about is a commitment at least to the next 10 years. And that's the conversation I'm having every day as we speak with CEOs and engaging them to focus on that. And so I also believe that I know I will judge myself on whether or not I have moved the needle in a significant way around issues of diversity and inclusion.
For the benefit of our audience who might not have seen your opinion piece, it appeared in the Hartford Courant on May 30th, and I highly recommend you're taking the time to read it. It is well worth your time. Treasurer Wooden, thank you again for sharing your time, your knowledge with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Shawn Wooden, 83rd Treasurer of the state of Connecticut.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you, Fairview, for all that you do.
Well, thank you, sir. It's a pleasure to work for you.